So we are here today with Providence College sociology professor Cedric de Leon, who wrote a book called The Origins of Right-to-Work. Cedric, before we get into your book, tell us what Right-to-Work is.
Right-to-work is a kind of legislation in which workers are supposedly given the choice of whether or not to pay dues. Okay, so it's not agency fee, which is where a worker has the right to choose whether to be a member or non-member of the union, but rather the choice of having to pay something or pay nothing at all, right? And so right-to-work laws essentially encourage free riders in the workplace.
Tell us about free riders. What do you mean when you say free riders?
What I mean by free rider is, well, everybody's basically experienced a free rider situation at some point in their lives. They're working in a group and there's one person who's basically slacking off, and they slack off because they know that the group is going to take care of everything and he or she is going to reap the benefits of what the group is doing. And that is what a free rider is. In the workplace, somebody who doesn't pay dues is relying on everybody else to pay dues. And that person is expecting to reap the benefits of collective bargaining and of grievance handling and so forth without paying for anything.
Right. So essentially what happens is people don't have to pay for the benefits that they are receiving.
That's right. That's right. Exactly.
Okay. What possessed you? What made you decide to write a book about right-to-work?
The main reason is that I was a rank-and-file member and local union president of a public employee union in Michigan. I was the president of the Graduate Employees Organization at the University of Michigan. The TAs there are unionized, and I was their president for a few years. I also worked on staff for the teachers' union for various locals and also the international. And so when I heard in 2012 that Michigan, the birthplace of the modern U.S. labor movement, went the way of most southern states as a right-to-work state, I was just gutted. And I think this was partly my way of dealing with it, which is essentially to kind of fight back.
I love that.
But
I love that. You weren't going to do nothing, even though you were 1,000 miles away. You wrote a book about it.
That's right. The book is dedicated to the teachers' union in Michigan.
Oh, that's great. I love that. So that's a nice segue. Tell us about what your book is about.
The book is really about two things. Generally, it's about the bait and switch that characterizes the lives of workers in American democracy, right?
Let me grab you there for a second.
Yeah, sure.
Explain that bait and switch for me.
Yeah, basically, workers are enticed by the prospects of social mobility, the American dream, but they're at the same time denied a collective route to fulfill the promise of the American dream. And in the policy realm, the perfect example of that is right-to-work laws, right? Yeah. So presumably right-to-work laws protect the right of workers to organize a union, but they prohibit those same workers from actually funding their union.
Right.
So you can have a union, but you can't fund it, right? And so the book is secondly about the origins of those kinds of laws, going back to the Northern victory in the Civil War when politicians began framing trade unions as conspiracies to enslave free white men.
As far back as the Civil War, this was happening.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. As far as I can tell, the first piece of legislation along these lines, legislation that is similar to the Wisconsin legislation, the attempt to do so in Ohio and Michigan and Indiana, was in 1863. On the outskirts of Chicago, and then after that, the next two laws were in 1887, passed by the state legislature, primarily in response to the Haymarket Affair in 1886.
Love that. Did they call it right to work back then?
No, they didn't. They called them conspiracy laws, right? Because the guiding assumption was that unions were conspiracies to undermine the freedom of free white men, right? But they used the words right to work in their support, their public advocacy
Right.
of
So
conspiracy
the
laws.
term goes back that far, but
That's
they
right.
weren't talking about. They weren't called right to work laws at
That's
that
right.
time.
They were called conspiracy laws.
How did they end up with the name right to work laws, which I think is just one of the biggest misnomers in American politics? I mean, if I
Right.
think about it,
Yeah.
I want a right to work, but then once I learned about the laws, I realized, well, I don't really want anything like that. Do you know how they became? And
Right.
I'm really interested in how did we all start calling them right to work laws?
Yes, and this is sort of like, a little bit of a dispute in the scholarship and in labor history. What I think happened is that right to work laws, the logic of conspiracy laws, which was the right to work,
Yeah.
became the name of the laws in the 1940s and 50s in the United States.
Yeah.
So folks, some historians insist that right to work laws go back to the middle of the 20th century,
Yeah.
right? Because that's when the laws were actually called right to work laws.
Yeah.
And those laws were slightly different in the sense that politicians and employers were using them to divide workers by race.
Yeah.
What they were saying essentially was, look, if we let the New Deal run roughshod over the South, and unions have the right to organize just about anybody, what will happen is that unions will consist of both white and black members, right? And to white folks, they said, well, you don't want that, do you? Right? So that was the sort of there was very much a racist Jim Crow animus behind that set of laws, right? But I would say, the 1940s and 50s was when the logic of right to work actually also became the name of the laws themselves. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
Yes, it does. Yeah. So, how long did that kind of racist element to these laws remain? Does it still remain? It may still.
Right. I mean, I think that that the racist animus in right to work laws goes back to its beginning, right? I mean, when the first conspiracy laws were advocated, the political rhetoric in order to get support for them was about maintaining the individual rights of free white men.
Yeah.
And the implication was that if you were going to be in a union subject to union rules, etc., then you were going to be no better than the black bonded slaves who we just freed.
Right.
So the blacks would be freed, but then we would be enslaved, right, was the implication.
Yeah.
Okay? So it goes as far back as that, and that was the racist logic of that set of laws. Today...
we don't really need racism to pit worker against worker anymore, do we?
Right. I mean, racism... I mean, I think that the right to work laws are now being framed very carefully by the National Right to Work Coalition and other advocates and ALEC and the Koch brothers and the Republican Party to say that this is business-friendly legislation. But what we know is that the structural effects of right-to-work laws hit women and people of color disproportionately in the sense that they occupy, they're disproportionately represented among the lower rungs of society, the folks who would most benefit right now from unionization. Right. So moving away from racism just a little bit, but to also sexism, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if you think about the draconian public sector collective bargaining law in Wisconsin, what percentage of teachers are women?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, the vast majority of public sector employees in the area of education are women. So what are right to work laws actually do? They are undermining the power, the collective power and the earning power of women, right? But you don't hear right to work advocates, uttering sexist, chauvinist things.
Yeah.
They're doing it indirectly
Yeah.
through structural changes in the legislation.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. What should we call right to work laws? You know, like, let's say you branded them. What would you call these variety of laws that make it so people can be free riders in their unions?
Right. I mean, I think that I take my cue here from labor movement folks who call them right to work for less.
Right to work for less. That's right.
That's what I would call them.
Yeah.
Because right to work undermines the collective power of unions, which in turn undermines the ability of workers to press for a living wage.
Yeah.
So the result of right to work laws is basically less pay,
right,
less economic insecurity.
Yeah. So we've talked about this a little. Tell me about right to work in its current form. What's going on around the country, and mostly the Midwest, correct, in terms of right to work laws? There's something of a little wave happening.
That's right. That's right. The way that you describe it as a wave is appropriate. Right to work laws have come in this country in waves.
Yeah.
First, after the Civil War, then in the 1920s in the closed shop movement, then after Taft-Hartley in the 40s and 50s, and now in the 2010s we have another wave of right to work laws. And so I would say a couple of things about it, the current state of right to work. First of all, immediately after right to work was passed in these old Rust Belt states, several legislatures throughout the country have decided to take it up. They're in committee right now. None of them, except for most recently the Missouri law, have even come out or onto the floor of the state legislatures. But rest assured, right to work is on the march throughout the country. So that's number one. But that is a sort of state legislative version of right to work. The thing that we should be worried about here in Rhode Island and across the country, in addition to the legislative piece, is the fact that the U.S. Supreme Court has taken the petition of a teacher named Fredericks in California in her lawsuit against the California Teachers Association.
Okay.
For many years now, conservative Supreme Court Justice Sam Alito has said that he wanted to overturn Abood, which was the kind of compromise ruling of the Supreme Court to say that not everybody had to be a member, but everybody has to pay something because they're represented by the union through bargaining and through grievance handling.
What's this court case called?
Abood. It was late 1970s, I believe 77.
Okay, thanks.
So Alito has said publicly that he's wanted to overturn that ruling for a very long time. The fact that this court, with its conservative majority, agreed to take the petition in June of this year suggests that they want to make a right-to-work ruling that applies to all public sector workers across the country. And if that's true, then we need to pay attention to that in Rhode Island and across the country, and we need to figure out, as a movement and also as allied progressives, what we're going to do once Fredericks comes down.
And then, so that's a Supreme Court case that could effectively make it right to work the law of the land across the country.
For the public sector.
For the public sector. Okay, that's
right.
an important distinction. But what that would mean is, if you don't want to pay dues to your union that you belong to, then you don't have to.
Yeah, if you don't want to, that's right. That's exactly what would happen.
Yeah. And in fact, it's actually, if you don't want to pay dues to the union you may or may not belong to, but are reaping the benefits of.
That's why I hesitated a little bit. That's more accurate.
Yeah. So this might be taken care of on the federal level. This is something.
That's right.
Okay. It seems like you think that's a real possibility.
I think it's a real possibility. All the signals are there. I mean, Kennedy, who's the swing vote on the court, I mean, which way is he going to go? I mean, I don't really know if he has a body of jurisprudence with respect to labor that we could look at. I just don't know. What we know is that he is socially liberal. Yeah. Okay, but will he be liberal, in the socioeconomic sense of that word? Yeah. Right?
Yeah.
Who knows?
So we've actually, a lot of us remember during the campaign when the Republican candidate, Alan Fung, said, "Oh, your right to work isn't, Rhode Island's not a right to work state. I wouldn't push for that as governor." But we don't even need a conservative Rhode Islander to
That's right.
propose this.
Right.
Sam Alito could do this all for him. If he gets 4 more buddies to agree with him,
That's right.
it's taken care of.
Yeah, that's right. Although I think it's important to mention that that Fung initially, sort of early on in his campaign, indicated that he was for turning Rhode Island into a right-to-work state. That he backpedaled as he got the nomination and his campaign started to get ahead of steam. And I think what that suggests is that, given the right conditions, Alan Fung and even moderate Republicans,
Maybe even moderate Democrats.
that's right, would support right to work. And let's not forget that Fredericks is applicable only to the public sector. So a state legislative fix, let's say, if you can talk about it as a fix if you're a conservative, right?
Or a break.
Yeah, that's right. Is not off the table, right? I mean, if Fung and other Rhode Island Republicans and conservative Democrats want to pass right to work legislation, it would still have an impact, but this time on the private sector, which would make the whole state right to work.
Yeah. What would a national right to work law do for the labor movement in the United States?
Do for or do against?
You tell me what you think. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, look, I guess I'll put it this way. This is not the first time that this has happened to the labor movement, right? At the turn of the century, Chief Justice Melville Fuller, who's actually a Chicago Democrat, who I talk about in the book. It's interesting you mentioned conservative Democrats, right? Because he was the architect of let's say the historical equivalent to the Fredericks case, right? In the Danbury Hatters case, he ruled that unions were conspiracies in restraint of trade.
Yeah.
So forget right to work; they were a conspiracy.
Right.
I mean, they were outlawed. I mean, essentially, on the Supreme Court's account, and the labor movement obviously bounced back from that, continued to organize, and of course, as we know, looking back now, there was the New Deal and the sort of golden age of progressive unionism in this country. After that happened in 1902, so it's not as if we're doomed for forever. But
the pendulum swings both ways.
Yeah, well, yeah, and I mean, it's important though that employers and conservative lawmakers aren't doing this to benefit the labor movement.
Right.
They're trying to kill the labor movement. What they see is an opportunity here to basically wipe out the remaining institutional opposition to neoliberal globalization in their lifetime. They want to eradicate the labor movement. And better people have tried and failed.
Yeah.
So I think that though I support the labor movement in opposing right to work and will organize side by side with them, on the other hand, I have full confidence in my comrades that we'll find a way out.
Love that. Why do you think they're gaining popularity at this point in history again?
Well, because I think that the logic of politics is neoliberalism. I mean, it's this notion that free markets and free trade are the surest route to widespread economic prosperity, and that the obstacle to that prosperity is state regulation and unions, right? And I think that the conservative movement and certainly a huge swath of the Republican Party have succeeded in making that common sense, right? So when Republican administrations in the Rust Belt, where the labor movement is still very strong relative to the rest of the country, appeal to this rhetoric, I think it has some mass appeal. I think people say, "Oh yeah, well sure." I think we've tried labor unions and state regulations in the past, and that hasn't worked for us. Maybe we can go this other way, right? That's of course wrong. It's historically and politically and empirically wrong, but that's not to say that it's unappealing as a mode of rhetoric. That's very clear.
When you were organizing in Michigan, Michigan's a right-to-work state now.
Yeah, right, that's right.
When you were organizing in Michigan, did anyone in your union or any of your comrades in other unions, did anyone ever think it was possible that Michigan could become a right-to-work state?
No, but there was an attempt to get rid of dues checkoff, right? There was
Tell me what dues checkoff means.
It means it means that that the employer agrees to automatically deduct dues or service fees if you're a non-member from your paycheck and then hand a check over to the union, right? So it was a method to just basically routinize dues payments. So
it's like direct deposit.
It's right, direct deposit, exactly. It's direct. Instead of getting a bill in the mail, you got it automatically deducted. It was the law anyway, so you had to pay. Might as well make it easy, right? So that failed, but we never contemplated that Michigan would become Alabama. Right. It was never even on the radar. Right. When I heard it, I was just gutted. And the thing is, it's not as if it built up over a while, the Michigan story, right? It was passed on one day of a lame duck legislative session, December 11th, 2011, and then signed into law by Governor Rick Snyder. It all happened in one day.
And it can be just that quick.
It can be just that quick, and I think, look, this is the thing, folks who don't think that that a legislative move along these lines, if folks in Rhode Island think that that's impossible, then what we know is that there are ways to do this. The Republicans knew that if they had a public debate in the full light of day, a months-long struggle over the right to work law, they would lose. So what they did was they basically closed the doors, had a backdoor talk, rammed that legislation down the throats of the people without any consultation or review.
And that could certainly happen in Rhode Island. We pass a budget that same exact way every single year, right?
Right. Well, you know the budget process better than I do.
Unfortunately for me.
Yeah.
So how did you come to labor politics or the labor movement? How did you become a progressive?
Yeah. I was actually a conservative in high school in my early years of college.
I love that.
And the reason I became a progressive is that I joined a program called the One World Program, which was run by a bunch of excommunicated priests in Toronto. I'm from Toronto originally.
Okay.
And they were excommunicated because they wanted to welcome women into the priesthood, gays into the church, and all kinds of progressive socioeconomic policies. So of course they were kicked out of the church.
Yeah.
So I worked with them, and they took me on a trip to Mexico, and we lived in a number of shanty towns and other kind of poor neighborhoods throughout Mexico. And when I came back, I realized that all of my creature comforts were built on the backs of these people's deprivation, and I couldn't live with myself any longer, as if that didn't exist.
Yeah.
And so I decided that I wanted to do something about that. And at the same summer that I was in Mexico, my friend Winifred Cow had worked with the United Farm Workers. And so she approached me and asked me whether or not I wanted to work for a UFW support group at Yale. Which we did, and we actually, it was back in the day, so we were still working on the grape boycott.
No, I love that.
We got grapes out of Yale dining halls. We succeeded. We got 5,000 signatures. It was insane.
No kidding.
Yeah, so
that's going pretty far back.
Yeah, so that was my gateway drug into the labor movement.
I love it. And I never would have guessed it was a group of Catholic priests that would have brought you to the progressive movement.
That's right. Yeah, well, that is a part of the church that many folks, including some folks here at Providence College, want to deny actually exist, and that Pope Francis brought out of the woodwork.
I wanted to ask you what it's like to be a progressive professor here at Providence College. You're not the only one, but you can't be in the majority by any stretch of the imagination.
Right. I think it's both easy and difficult. It's easy in the sense that there is a small cadre of very dedicated progressives among the faculty, students, and staff.
Cool.
And we give each other a lot of support and affirmation. We work together. We organize together. That's really something, right? I mean, that's not nothing.
Yeah.
And it makes it easy to be a progressive here. On the other hand, the administration doesn't make it easy.
How so?
It just in the sense that it's demoralizing to know that your institution is against what you believe in, but it's even more demoralizing to be given the kind of lip service, and then to go back to watch them go back on their word. Yeah. So publicly speaking, the Providence College is in favor of diversifying its student body and so forth, its faculty ranks, but what we know, as Steve Alquist reported several months ago, is that in fact racial profiling is rampant, and the college is not admitting that it is happening, and it's not doing anything about it.
Yeah.
So are you for diversity or not? It's sort of hard to say, and it's really dispiriting, not only to see that, but also to see my friends and colleagues and to experience myself that kind of sort of racial animus, right? I mean, we're not talking about just microaggressions, which is sort of a new word to talk about the kind of little ways in which people of color are demeaned on a regular basis. But my colleague Julia Jordan Zachary, who's the director of the Black Studies program here, received death threats when she announced an inaugural social justice award. Right? I had a rock thrown through my window in my home the week that the college Republicans of Rhode Island put me on a watch list of the most dangerously liberal professors in the state. So that's difficult.
How did you? You have a family, correct?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Kids?
Yeah, a kid. Yeah.
How did your family react to that?
I think I think that we were traumatized by it, and we didn't even talk about it for a long time. We didn't have the wherewithal to even have the window fixed for an entire year. I don't think I just think because we couldn't even look at it. We couldn't really admit that this had happened to us. I mean, it's a mild form, but it's a form of terrorism, Yeah. It was just like, oh, well, how do you know if, some crazy right-wingers threw a rock through my window? Well, nobody else has, at any time since I've been here for 8 years, has thrown a rock to my window. You're trying to tell me that there's a coincidence, just a mere coincidence, that the same week I'm placed on a watch list of dangerous professors, that a rock gets thrown through my window? That seems like a hate crime to me.
That seems like a hate crime to me.
Right, yeah. So.
Did you report it to the police?
We didn't. Like I said, I just think. I've talked to many people at the college. I've told higher ups about what happened. But honestly, I think that we were just traumatized by the event. I guess I could have, called the police, but.
I'm so sorry that happened.
No, thank you. Yeah.
And so you've actually organized against the college.
That's right.
So this is about the Providence College has not severed its relationship with the Procasante Group hotels.
Right.
And you called attention to that, and tell us the rest of the story, if you will. And if there was any blowback from from the college for doing so.
Just with respect to the hotel workers.
Tell us all the ways you organized it.
Yeah, nothing has happened with respect to TPG, right? I mean, that's the short story. We pushed the envelope, and their only communication to us was that they believed that the issue had been resolved by the National Labor Relations Board and the case was closed, right? And of course, as we know, TPG, sort of settled the NLRB claim, but they still won't recognize the workers,
right,
and they still won't negotiate with them. So the underlying problem is still festering, right? And that is unchanged, obviously. We've organized on a number of occasions, some successfully, sometimes not so much. When I first came here, we tried to get the administration to sign on to a sweat-free pledge, and just basically say we're not going to sell sweatshop clothing in our college bookstore. Yep. And after a year of struggle, they at last decided to sign on to what's called the Workers' Rights Consortium. Yeah. And agree to be monitored and agree to do business only with companies who would submit to monitoring. And overseas factories.
So I can safely assume my PC national champion hockey hat was not made by sweatshop labor.
Right. Right. I mean, or you can assume at least that the factories that made it are part of a group of factories that have submitted or said that they are willing to submit to checks.
Right.
I mean, they're actually. It's funny you mentioned.
It's actually an important distinction. There's a lot of room between those two definitions.
That's right, and there are different monitoring groups too. So so the FLA, which is the bosses monitoring group, basically means nothing. Right. Oh, we're FLA certified. Well, great, congratulations. It means nothing. Yeah. Right, but it's funny you mentioned hockey because actually the hockey jerseys are made in the USA.
Oh, that's great.
There are a number of things that are made in the USA, and there are a number of things that are made actually in a series of shops in Latin America that are unionized. Yeah. So that's a good thing, and I think that was a major victory for us. We also organized to reform the Western civilization curriculum. The sort of like the core of a Providence College student's first 2 years is the development of Western civilization, or CIV for short. Yeah. Yeah. And a group of students and faculty organized to reform that. They refused to change the name, but they radically reformed the core curriculum to include things like a diversity requirement, civic engagement requirement, etc., etc. Yeah. That was a victory.
So, in other words, it's still called Western Civ, even though they probably teach world civilization.
Effectively, yes. I mean, especially in the sophomore year, when they get into seminars. Yeah. So so those are examples of successes. The TPG piece, the hotel workers, is an unsuccessful campaign, but so far. That's right. So
so you're still working on it.
Yeah, that's right. Okay. That's right.
The time we picked up on it, I'm embarrassed to say I'm going to forget the priest's name, but Providence College brought in the liberation theologist.
Yeah,
I'm sure I'm making up that word there. But
theologian. Yeah.
Theologian. Thank you, Cedric. Yeah. So tell me, can you explain to me liberation theology? This might be outside of your expertise, but
it is outside of my expertise. But I know broadly that liberation theology is the notion that the emancipation of the poor is a godly act. I mean, it basically carves out a space for revolution within Catholic doctrine. Yeah. Right. And part of that is a kind of social justice message with respect to labor in particular. And so as that was happening, I and the other organizers of the campaign were trying to sort of point out the contradiction between the college's insistence that they remain in contact, doing business with the Renaissance Hotel and TPG, while at the same time giving an honorary degree to a liberation theologian. I mean, that doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah.
So that's the story.
How
there.
far is PC's kind of ethos from liberation theology? Is PC a really conservative college?
I would say that the administration is relatively conservative within the kind of political spectrum of the Catholic Church. I would say center, left of center, you would find Jesuits and Lasallians.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then to the right of center, you would find the Dominicans, and then all the way to the right, Opus Dei.
Okay.
And those folks. I mean,
Right.
those are the folks who were partly responsible for the Falangistas in Spain, the Spanish Civil War, on the side of Franco.
Right on.
Right. The right wing of the Catholic Church was for fascism in that epoch of world history. So these we're talking about Dominicans here.
Yeah.
And Dominicans and Franciscans were the shock troops of Spanish colonialism. Right. They have a long history. And so I would say far from liberation theology.
Okay.
Not as far as possible within the Catholic Church, but quite far.
I was going to kind of term it for the sports fans. It's not quite Boston College, but it's not quite Notre Dame either.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. That's right. There's something.
How did you end up in Rhode Island?
Well, I ended up in Rhode Island twice. My first job out of college was with 1199 SEIU here in Providence.
I love that.
Yeah, I was organizing healthcare workers here in the mid-90s. And then my first tenure track gig out of graduate school was at Providence College. That's why I'm here.
You just keep coming back to Rhode Island to
That's
do
right.
good work.
I can't get away.
Sometimes it's for students. Sometimes it's for healthcare workers.
Right.
When did you work with SEIU?
96 to 97.
And when did you come back to be a professor here at PC?
2007, 10 years later.
How's Rhode Island been treating you, Cedric?
Rhode Island has been treating me really well.
Good.
It's a different place. It's less gritty than it used to be.
Yeah.
Everybody mentions the fact that the mall is there now and so forth, but there's just I feel like a lot less kind of grassroots, blue collar kind of culture here anymore. Even the ethnic enclaves are disappearing. I mean, for example, Miller's Deli on Hope Street. That's sort of like a small example, but that was one of the last vestiges of the old, Jewish neighborhood on Hope Street. It's gone.
Yeah.
And so too have so many of things like that.
Right, and we've kind of traded that bodega culture for the nouveau cuisine culture
that's right.
Draws people from the suburbs and really all over the East Coast to come and eat here in Providence.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So, are you going to stay in Rhode Island a while?
Yeah, that's the plan. It's been good to us. We have a really great life here.
Yeah.
And like I said, I really appreciate, admire, and respect my progressive colleagues here at PC. So for now, it's a good place to be.
Cool. How's the book going so far, Cedric?
It's going okay. It's interesting. I think that it's going to attract more attention from academic circles as it gets into libraries and gets into the hands of academics, right?
Yeah.
But so far, the main reaction has been from the progressive community, which is great. I did write it for academics in part, but mainly I wrote it for the labor movement and for progressives, and so through outlets like truthout.org and so forth. I feel like it's attracted quite a bit of good attention, and I think that means a lot to me.
And it's certainly a hot topic. It's the right topic for the times, I think, in fact.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's a coincidence. I mean, I didn't write it because it was a hot topic. I wrote it because it's deeply troubling to me. But I think the week that the book came out, Scott Walker signed the Righttowork law in Wisconsin.
No kidding.
Yeah, I mean, I wish the timing was completely off. Like there were no right
Right.
to work laws anymore,
Right.
and that that the book launch would not be coinciding with
Right.
retrograde fascist legislation. But there it is, right? Now people are going to buy the book because we're in deep trouble.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not.
The irony, your
Yeah.
book will do great because what you want to see happen, the opposite
Is
is
happening.
occurring.
Yeah, right,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cedric, what am I forgetting to ask you?
No, I think you got it. Yeah.
So, good luck with the book. Good
Thank
luck
you.
with the book event we'll be hosting for you. More
Yes.
information on that to come, and I'm sure our readers and viewers will be hearing more from you in the near future.
All right.
Thanks a million, Cedric.
Thanks, Bob.
You're welcome.